We start off with the usual prayer. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditam Astoma Vidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily quarrel with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we're continuing our study of the Katha Upanishad, and just a few comments before we pick up where we left off. So previously we had established in the Katha Upanishad just the idea that if we take our own individual existence to be simply a physical thing, then we will only be orientated toward physical satisfactions. But Nachiketa in the Katha Upanishad is not tempted in this way. Even though the vast majority of us, if offered the rewards of the lotto, would probably purchase a desert island or any other number of things, Nachiketa sees that in this life and also the next life, there is no merit in all of this. So he wants to know the fundamental questions. And this is very difficult because most people feel embodied. Most people feel that they are a physical entity with a certain personal history, and that history then will take us through life in such a way that our efforts will bring rewards. And we keep the idea of death in a closet. We don't want to attend to it. Of course, all around us, people are dying as you get older also. Old friends are disappearing. So at some stage or other, it must occur to somebody. What is mortality? What is immortality? Everybody experiences the one. Nobody wants to experience the other. And so what to do about this? This is a fundamental inquiry that we all make. And so previously we had shown how in the context of killing even, or being killed, similar to what is stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Yama, the supreme teacher of death, death itself, who controls everything, he tells us that nobody is slain and nobody slays. That doesn't mean to say we should go around killing people. It just means that there is another entity that is much more profound, deeper inside of us. And it is this that we should try to realize. This is the purpose of our life, goal of our life. If there's no inclination toward it, nature has a way of urging us toward it. Our goal is perfection. But how to achieve that? Is there a technique? So there is a technique and also a question asked. What is the nature of this? And we discovered that it is difficult to discover because it is smaller than the atom. We have to understand in the ancient days, the atoms that we only discovered comparatively recently in modern science was known about in the ancient days. The whole philosophy built around this is something that maintains, atheistic system also, maintains that there are tiny, tiny units. Even in modern science, if you say, well, these tiny units are quarks, it still holds valid. But modern science goes one step further, and the ancient people also go one step further to say that there are no particles. All this comes now to one ocean of existence. Everything that we call matter gets resolved into one thing, we call it Akasha. And so the Sankhya understanding of this remains for all philosophies. It was not a difficulty to think that there's one ocean and many varieties of waves can arise from it. To select one individual wave and close your vision and concentrate on that only, denies the fact that your essence is water, ocean. That is your substance. And so, Anor Aniyan Mahatu Mahiyan Atmasya Jantu Nihita Guhayam, it is smaller than the smallest, the tiniest atom, tiniest fragment, and yet it is also greater than the greatest. Modern science is going down to see what is the microcosm of this existence, and then it looks out at the cosmos and sees such a vastness. When we see this dilution, we come to a certain phrase, darkness covering darkness. Somebody asked me this morning, what do I mean darkness covers darkness? Of course, I can be very remote from the statement and say, don't blame me. This is contained in a text. The beautiful description, you look up into the universe or down into the universe is better understanding of it. Because you look down in the universe, you now get the understanding that you can go away from a geocentric position. You go outside the planet, there's no up, there's no down. Even though we think that we are rotating around the sun, not the other way, Copernicus's discovery and so on, still we are geocentric beings and egocentric beings. We still say up in the sky. There's no up, no down for it. When you go out there, what you'll find is only darkness. Miles and miles and miles of darkness. The density of the universe is very little. So imagine the darkest possible pitch black night you can have. Then add darkness on the top of that. You get a better idea. It's one way of saying it's nothing recognizable. And yet, from nothing comes nothing. Something must be there. So it is greater than the greatest, but we can't locate it, so to speak. It can't be located in terms of cosmology, it can't be located in terms of particle physics, but where it is seated in the heart, and it is seated deep. This entity that is called Atman or Self is seated in the heart of all beings. And seated in the heart of your own self, what you took to be a psychophysical unit, not related to anything else, there you can locate it. And the technique is meditation. This whole Katha Upanishad and all Upanishads provide us sufficient material for meditation, giving us concepts to replace the impossible in terms of conception. So, even though the self is of this kind, we know it's of this kind, we can take our position, our status quo in the world around us, something like an individual in a whole field of co-relationships, standing in a certain position and thinking all people, places, and events are separate, and having a strategy that we need to combat that. So when this Upanishad says, you don't have to worry about somebody interfering with you or killing you, nor do you have to fight back. You have to revalue what is there. There is no opposition against you. There's only a oneness. And where you find it is in your own essence. So the ancient sages didn't start off with, I am here, where is God? They started with, I am here, what is that? And if I'm able to understand that, I can understand everything. You don't have to sample every drop of water to know what is the ocean. And this is something of a mistake in modern science, actually, to say that we should not generalize. But the great scientists generalized. They have a general theory of relativity. You have to find that entity behind which everything emanates from that one thing. So this self is subtler, aniyan, subtler than the subtlest, greater than the great, is lodged in the heart. Your heart, personal heart, no, you don't have special privileged access to it. It's in the heart of every creature. A desireless person sees that the glory of the self through the serenity of the organs, and thereby he becomes free from sorrow. All along this phrase, na shuchati, is used. What is our difficulty? We don't have any joy and happiness. You might say, no, I'm perfectly happy, thank you. But that's only as long as your bank account is in a good condition. It's only as long as you don't have arthritis on the knee. It's only if people are unkind to you, then you're completely unhappy. And we are so fragile, just a few words of criticism would drive us towards suicide. What a terrible condition. You can't say we are happy. Basically, we're unhappy, looking for happiness. If you say, I want happiness and joy, it means you haven't got it. You're looking for it. All right, that's fine. So, a desire means there's some felt gap in me that I can get from the outside. Well, if fulfillment is in me, called this Atman or self, there's no need to get anything from the outside. I have to discover it from the inside. So what blocks it is desire. And the desire is relentless. As soon as one thing is fulfilled, you want something else. And then something else and something else. Supposing your desire is to sit on a desert island with tropical trees and azure blue seas and fresh air and a lot of food provided by nature, you still may well be bothered by mosquitoes. There's no condition like this. All right. So a desirous person sees that the glory of the self, because we are blind to that, wherever we look, we miss it. The one who sees this through the serenity of the organs, what does it mean? The organs are jumping things. They are hooked to something called attention. Attention wants to drive them here and then there and there, always looking, something like a monkey, ever agitated. Or a kitten. It's easy to distract the attention of a kitten. Today, you just take a laser light and put it here, make it dart around. The kitten thinks that it is something and tries to chase it. Endlessly entertaining. And entertaining for the person who's doing it also. Poking fun at it, taking advantage of the kitten's innocence. Hey, come on, play, let me see, let me laugh. So the organs become serene when they are controlled. When controlling them, it means you're controlling consciousness that is our birthright, that normally takes all these various avenues toward the outside. Somehow you're taking all of that and you're now looking inside. You're diverting it within, because this Atman, this divine self, is in the heart, not just of you, but all creatures. That means it is the same in all creatures. It is not separate anywhere. The Sankhya's want it to be separate. How do they want it to be separate? Having compiled everything generously into one thing called nature, they made individual purushas, persons literally, people. And so the reason behind that is because if you get enlightenment, we'll all get it if we're all the same. If you're a fool, we'll all be fools. But you see, Vedanta answers this question. No, this self is subtler than anything which is dimensional and greater than anything that is vast. Anything, in other words, it transcends space. It transcends the units of time. So Shankaracharya's commentary goes like this. Whatever great or atomic thing there be in the world, he says, can be so by being possessed of its reality through that eternal self. If it is subtler than something, it's the master of something. In a sense, the ocean is a master of the waves. When deprived of that self, it is reduced to unreality. Can it ever be deprived of the self? No. Can it be ever viewed to be deprived of the self? Yes. When our reality is what is in front, all these scenes, and we set up a strategy that makes a combat with it and feel we are affected by it, then we miss this reality. What is science studying? Unreality. Therefore, says Shankaracharya, that very self is subtler than the subtle, greater than the great, for it is conditioned by all names, forms, and activities, which are its limiting adjuncts. Here was some example of limiting adjuncts, mentioned so many times before. These are called upadis. This is a technical term for it. Upadi, normally translated as limiting adjunct. Yes, but on the other side is a manifesting adapter. Electricity being here, all pervasive, in an electromagnetic field present everywhere, therefore able to be accessed everywhere, you just need an adapter. There's great energy everywhere. You can harness it with an adapter. One point of it is the sun, one point of it is the moon, one point of it is your breath, and so it goes on. In that same way, when electrical current is flowing, you put an adapter called a light bulb, connected with a switch, and the light shines. It doesn't shine independently. It needs an electrical current to flow, and it needs the connection. That connection and that expressive entity that limits the vastness of the current is limiting the current, no doubt, by channeling it. But it's also manifesting light. Wherever we look, we can see multiple adapters manifesting the glory of this divine self. But if we're not careful, we don't notice it. We start blaming it. So it is conditioned by all the names and forms. This world is threefold: name, form, and underneath substance. Again, we can use the analogy of an ocean, where one substantial thing there, ocean, and several manifested entities called waves. And these waves interact. Now, according to Sankhya's arrangement of nature, these waves are subtle as well. These waves are called mere elements, tanmatras is a technical term for it. These tanmatras, if you discover them, if you discover that they combine, recombine, oscillate, permutate, and so on, then you actually, if you discover that everything is made from these, according to the Ashtavakra Gita, then you get your freedom straight away. When we see the nature of the apparition itself disappears. And the apparition is constructive of all these subtle elements. Subtler than that is the self. And that Atma or self, Nihita, is large, that is, exists as the self, Guhayam, in the heart. This is not the physiological heart. This is the colloquial heart, the heart of everything. The heart of a home can be the fire, or the heart of anything that is the inside, the most internal of the internals, the holy of holies. That entity that beams everywhere and makes sense of everything by virtue of its presence. So heart in that sense, like a cave. For meditation purposes, is put like that. Asya jantaho, of this creature, of all beings, beginning with all beings. When you say all beings, you have to say from Brahma to a clump of grass. Again, it's not a literal thing. Certainly from Brahma, that's a literal thing. But to a clump of grass, no, we can say a clump of grass, it means covering everything, everything that is in our objective experience. So Brahma, what is that? Brahma is the cosmic mind from which everything else came, that creative area that creates, manifests forward, not from second-hand material, but from itself. Everything is brought about and manifested, created, if you will, from this cosmic mind or creator. So, from Brahma and ending with a clump of grass, tam, that always refers to self, the means of whose realization are hearing, thinking, and meditation. All scripture has to be studied with that process. And we don't have to look for divine grace. The flow of thought is that already. Thought is flowing, captured by this upadi, this limiting adjunct, and manifesting as you want, probably as foolishness. So, listening, you have to listen first. That's the principle. This is Shravana, listening, hearing these truths. That alone is not enough. Many people hear something, just as Jesus says, those who have eyes, let them see, let those who have ears, let them hear. Some have ears, but they don't really hear. So the next thing is manana. That means you have to reason out, is this reasonable? A kind of contemplation. What does it really mean? And then to catch the actual meaning. And that step is called meditation or understanding through meditation, udidhyasana. So, all of this, hearing, thinking, and meditation. A desireless person, that is, one whose intellect has been withdrawn from all the outer objects, seen or unseen, when this detachment takes place, datavaha, the organs, such as the mind is the queen bee of all the organs. Everything obeys where the mind is going, become composed. This is called self-control. The dhatus being so called because of their holding, and dharana, the body. So, through the serenity of these organs, we can see the glory of the self, which is not subject to growth and decay. What is the characteristic of the non-self? It is subject to growth and subject to decay. Anything that is assembled from different parts will fall apart. We can test it out. Something, and it is also the principle in philosophy, for the good of an independent other. You take a car has so many different parts. It's not so these parts can make a cooperative and play while you're not looking. It is for the good of somebody else, an independent driver, who gets inside and drives the car. If we revalue this body, we won't call it my body, we'll call it maybe the divine earth car. We just happen to be driving it. This earth car is here, made from earthy material called food. Yesterday's bananas and porridge, and comes today here for your use. What is the use? The twofold use that can be made. One function is to peep and look at the outside world and get all the information from there. And one is to look within and see what is the presence that allows all the other activities to work and move. So the technique is stop having desires. But that would be a negative process. We have to substitute the desires for a desire of some other kind, a desire for truth, even beyond it, a thirst for truth, a thirst for all the answers, and put in religious terminology, a thirst for God. So the same senses that bring us disturbance, devoid of desire, will be completely serene. and we will see things in a different way. We will see, in the words of the Upanishad, the self in all beings and all beings in the self. So this self, which is not subject to growth, not subject to decay, in accordance with the result of work, that is, all action becomes binding in this text, in this context. I just lost the Kindle. Yeah. Okay. So that is, he directly realizes this inner self in the heart of oneself and all other creatures as an identifying entity, an identification, not identifying with the body, not identifying with the objects that the body relates to, but now a new identification comes that says, I am the self. No other system other than this declares it blatantly, directly. I am the self. What a wonderful system. Everyone else seems to skirt around this thing. But all the great teachers state it. Somehow theologians skirt it. When you think of all the divisions, the priests, the mullahs, the pundits, they all want to divide everything. Because the mystics and philosophers want to unite everything. So he directly realizes himself as I am the self, and thereby he becomes Vita Shokaha. What an important phrase. Free. Free from what? I remember having a discussion with which I eternally regret, with the person who was the president or something of the Atheist Society in Ireland. And when I mentioned that the goal is freedom, everybody else he had discussed with had said, the goal is heaven. I said, no, the goal is freedom. Then he asked, freedom from what? And I said, freedom from sorrow, freedom from pain, freedom from unhappiness. I never met anybody yet who said, my goal is to be unhappy. So free from sorrow, this is all practical. Otherwise, the self is difficult to be known by ordinary people who are possessed of desire, because the next stanza is there. While sitting, it travels far away. While sleeping, it goes everywhere. Who but I can know that deity who is both joyful and joyless? So this is the same kind of dichotomy we find in the Upanishad. While sitting, it travels far away. In other words, it seems to travel, it seems to be there ahead of us, no matter how far we go, but it doesn't travel anywhere. It's already there. And while sleeping, it goes everywhere. We go to sleep. Philosophers won't say it. Philosophers will say, we sit on the divine lap. We sit where God sits. It's called deep sleep. And then from there we manifest all kinds of other things, dream, waking state, and so on. But that entity is always present. It doesn't go into any condition. And so, while sleeping, it's traveling everywhere. It seems to be there in dream with all our adventures. You can be a king with a queen in a palace and live for 1,000 years there. And then goes into a state of seeming oblivion. Even there it is there. It penetrates everywhere. Without going anywhere. Without entering into space. Without being conditioned by time. It is everywhere. And it is both joyful and joyless. Let us see what Shankaracharya says. So while Ashina, sitting, remaining stationary motionless, and while sleeping, he goes into that. Similarly, that deity, the self, is Madhamadaha, possessed of Mada, and devoid of Mada, joyful and joyless, possessed of contradictory qualities. Hence it being difficult to know it, because it's not joyful in the conventional sense. Joyful, according to the person who thinks all their joys come from unfulfilled desires being fulfilled, will, at the end of it, not really be joyful. Only for a moment, no doubt. And this entity is characterized as Sat Chit Ananda, that is existence itself, consciousness itself, bliss itself. So it is fully joyful, but not in an objective way, in a subjective way. So possessed of contradictory qualities, hence it being difficult to know. Therefore, I add, we need 1,000 tools. Take every one. That joyful and joyless deity, it is only by a wise person of fine intellect, subtle intellect, like us, that the self can be known. Since the self as conditioned by various contradictory limiting adjuncts, we take the adjunct to be the reality. If we didn't know any better, we would say the light and the light bulb is the same thing. So today, when people try to investigate what is consciousness, deemed to be the hard problem, David Chalmers, well, immediately somebody who is a complete materialist will have to resort to the paradigm of materiality and say consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain. Not understanding, no, there's a co-relationship, no doubt, between brain and consciousness, but the brain is an adapter, a limiting adjunct. Behind that is something going through. That is why neuroscientists cannot say, here is consciousness. We managed to catch it, put it in a fishing net, and analyze it. So Susan, Dame Susan, I forgot the other name, anyway, great neuroscientist, it'll come to me shortly. She says, not only can we not locate consciousness, but we can't even define what it is. So we take this limiting adjunct and deem it, we superimpose it. Somebody not knowing would say it is the light bulb itself which is shining, independently of anything else. No, it requires a current. You can't see the current, no doubt. It's very subtle. You can only see it through the adapter, the limiting adjunct. And is possessed of opposite qualities like rest and motion, permanence and impermanence, etc. Therefore, it appears variously like Vishwarupa, like a prism, something that divides the visible light into 7 different sections. This visible light. Like that, the prism is the mind. We say all this fragmented thing, the one self, seemingly fragmented through the mind. That means that if we substitute this word self with theological language, we can say, all this whole world is nothing more than fragmented God. Next question, how can that be being fragmented? No, seemingly fragmented. They require a prism. Light itself is white, but contains within it the potentiality of seemingly being split up into different frequencies. The eye catches it as red and all the other colors of the rainbow. So it appears variously like a prism, Vishwarupa, that is seen in form, or a philosopher's stone. Hence the difficulty of its realization is being pointed out in the sentence, Ka tam vadan yaha nyatam arhati, or who apart from me can know it. Sleep is the cessation of the activities of the senses, the delimitation of consciousness caused by the senses ceases for a sleeping man. There's a wonderful question in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where is this man gone? He fell asleep. Where is he gone? He seems to be wandering into some other realm. So if we poke him and say, hoi, he comes back. In other words, the senses get re-engaged. But in dream, they're engaged in a subtle way. The real senses are in the mind. Not these organs of eyes and ears and so on and so forth. That's why Swami Vivekananda points out. Now he's talking in the old days when horse carriages are going past the window. He says, if your attention is tuned into what I'm saying, No matter how many carriages pass the window, you won't hear them. But if your attention wanders from my talk, I'm adding, then you'll hear the carriages and other noises. We're not constructed to hear everything in one go. That will be confusing. We'll be half mad if everything comes in one go. So we have the facility of time where every unit is engaged one by one. And we have this small probe called attention, which has the capacity to alight on one thing, and then another thing, and then another thing. So in sleep, all this attention comes out. We see things in a dream, we hear things in a dream, and then ultimately this consciousness is caused by the senses and ceases for a sleeping man completely. And when the self is in such a state of sleep, deep sleep, beyond dream, its consciousness being of a general character, it, yati sarvataha, seems to go to be present everywhere. When it is in a state of particularized consciousness, it is though really stationary by its own nature, duram vrachati, seems to travel far in accordance with the movement of the mind, etc. The mind being in a state of awake and then dream and dream asleep, it seems to travel along with it. Because it is conditioned by those minds, etc., the mind and the sense organs and so on and so forth, in reality it continues in this body only. And Shankaracharya further comments, he says, the text further shows how from the knowledge of the self comes the elimination of grief as well. How do I become happy? How do I relieve myself of difficulties and pain and sorrow, grief? One of the most telling griefs is bereavement. We lose somebody, we have that saying, we lost that person. Went into a region perhaps of lost and found. So that tells us how we view the body as the only reality which is there. It's only a relative reality, no doubt. And so therefore that sorrow comes because of a feeling of loss. But the self is never lost. So somebody who has this knowledge will not feel the absence of something, will not feel that there's a hollow or a gap to be filled. It will always be full. So having meditated on the self, so 22, ashariram, shariyeshu, anavasteshva, avastitam, mahatmam vibhum atmanam, matva dhiro na shochati. Having meditated on the self as bodiless in the midst of bodies, as permanent in the midst of the impermanent, and as great and pervasive, the wise person does not grieve. Now, having meditated on the self, all of these passages give us clues about meditation. How is it possible to meditate on such a subtle entity? First of all, our first clue comes, it's in the heart. That means we can have a capacity to visualize something in us and then match it with a feeling. Visualizing it alone won't be enough. You have to get close to that reality by feeling it. And the feeling intensified results in a realization of it. So what is it? Well, it's bodiless amidst all the bodies. It's permanent amidst the impermanent and great and pervasive. It's not just a fact. It's just meditate on the self as what? As having no body, and no form, that is. No assemblage of parts. The final datum that has no parts. And it doesn't go away. It's permanent. We can also visualize it like that consciousness, that entity whose consciousness is unflickering. This is told later in the Katha Upanishad. A beautiful image of an 11-gated city belonging to that entity who is unborn and whose consciousness is unflickering. Something that is flickering is impermanent and as great and pervasive. The mistake is if we think that the self is encapsulated in a cage of the heart, it is also restricted and not free. No, it is actually all pervasive, it goes everywhere. The commentary goes like this. The self in its own nature is like space. Having meditated on that self, so we can say like space gives us another clue. We can think of vast space. Now we get some understanding, even though symbolic. So like space, having meditated on that self, ashariram, unembodied, that bodiless self, in the midst of bodies. Bodies of what? Of gods, of mains, of human, that is, permanent in the midst of these impermanent beings, even these deities. Now, we have to clarify some misunderstandings. You see, gods, the word is devas. It means illuminating factors. It doesn't mean gods. It means shining ones. And the whole world is constructed by these shining forces, otherwise called tanmatras. If we have poetic imagination, we can call it angels. Angels working away everywhere, making the crooked path straight for us. Controlled by one mind. Tuning into that mind, we control nature. So, all of these entities are there in those that have no fixity amidst the impermanent, and having meditated again on that Mahatman, that great one, lest the greatness be taken relatively, the text says Shankaracharya, vipum, pervasive. And the word Atman or self is used to show the non-distinction of Brahman from oneself. If it pervades everywhere, then it's the same as that source of all beings, that fundamental supreme principle called Brahman. The Atman is not separate from it. It's pervasive also, like Brahman. You can't have two infinites. Your own infinite and some other infinite. When you discover the self, you've discovered that supreme principle everywhere, in everything. And so the word Atman primarily means the indwelling self, certainly, and having meditated there, described in this way, for meditation purposes, as I am this, on this self that is of this kind. The wise person, dhiraha na shochati, again this important phrase, does not grieve. For grief cannot reasonably belong to a person of this kind who has known the self. The text says that though this self is difficult to know, it can be known well. How? Through proper means. So how do we know it, and how will we be deceived in not knowing it? Don't forget, the previous one says knowing the body as selfless, as having no parts and so on and so forth. Nayam atma privachanina labhyo na medhaya na bhavuna shrutina. This self cannot be known through much study or book reading, nor through the intellect. You can't reason it out. You won't get there. In fact, of the two faculties that we have, thinking and feeling outweighs everything else. Better to feel, not overfeel, then you'll become an emotional wreck, but balanced. And in a contest between intellect and feeling will generally always win anyway. There's a secret of advertising. If somebody shows you face cream on the television and tells you, you see, this will knock 10 years off your life, then you feel, oh, okay, I better get this then. Certainly I want 10 years off my life. So to try to discover this self through pure reasoning, just through understanding the rational philosophy of this, won't actually access it. No more than if you hear about milk, Ramakrishna's example, then you won't taste milk. Some people have heard of milk, some people have seen milk, but those who really know milk are those who not only have heard of it and seen it, but tasted it and relished it. Nor through much hearing, it can be known through the self only. It only can be known through the self. That the aspirant prays to. This self of that seeker reveals its true nature. Should we pray to the self? Yes. When you visualize this self in a form that you love the most, we don't take this and Shankaracharya's non-dualism and throw dualism away. We take this and use the full capacity of our imagination. We are all image makers. We can only think in symbols and concepts. And the more beautiful or artistic, the better. If you have that understanding, that is, in this age, this is the preferred route in the ancient days. To access this through the path of discernment was good enough. People of keen intellect and dedicated life. There are many people who say, oh, I want to be a non-dualist. I don't believe in all this dualism. That's okay. Who did you listen to? Oh, Ramana Maharshi. Okay. If you really want to understand what he understood, please go up a mountain, live in a cave, and ask the relentless question, who am I? Oh, I don't think I can do that. All right. Let's start step 1, please. Then step 2, climb your own mountain. First step 1, step 2. And any good teacher, including the teachers in the Upanishads, will not show you all in one go. Will reveal to you what is appropriate to you. And then the next step. Like showing the moon, the example is by showing the end of the branch. See the end of the branch? Okay. See the moon? No, I can't. See the end of the branch? There it is, crescent moon. So it can be known through the self alone that the aspirant prays to. The self of that seeker reveals its true nature. Theologically, this is called grace. It is only who the self chooses that the self will reveal. All we're doing is polishing the mind. We are taking all the desires and putting them to one side. We're doing that by discriminative faculty that says, this will not give me happiness. Something else is there, something profound and deep, whose nature is bliss itself. Understanding and knowing that, in comparison to that, all the other things will go away. Then all these desires in this life become a game of trivial pursuit. It's better to find what is solid and real. So, and that the self reveals itself. Meditation won't do it. Karma yoga won't do it. Bhakti yoga won't do it. All these are doing is clearing the way for the self to reveal itself. This self is not to be attained, is not to be known, says Shankaracharya, going through the various words, through the acquisition of many Vedas, many texts, not through scripture. You have to tell this to people who say, I believe only in scripture, regardless of religion. You say, it is not in the scripture. Whatever is not in the scripture, where it is it? And not through the intellect, through the power of grasping the meaning of the texts. That just gives you a superficial understanding. Not through much hearing alone. How is it then to be known? This is being said. Yameva, that self indeed which is his, that is the aspirant's own self. This one, the aspirant prays to, by that very self, which is the seeker himself. The self itself is labhyaha. can be known. And Shankaracharya continues, that is, it becomes known to be such and such. The meaning in that is, the meaning is that to be, or to a desireless person who seeks for the self alone, the self becomes known of its own accord. How is it known? It's being said, it reveals itself. That's why we talk about revelation, or we talk about realization. It's not that something is to be gotten from somewhere. There's no shop that they sell the self. It is already there. If you don't realize this or know this, then you suffer from impatience. I'm doing so much spiritual practice and so on and so forth. Still I'm getting nothing. I'm getting nowhere. Look out the window. Is the God coming? No. Change my religion. Change my guru. All right. One who has not desisted further from bad contact, whose senses are not under control, whose mind is not concentrated, whose mind is not free from anxiety about the result of concentration, cannot attain this self through knowledge. Even the anxiety, you will say, I tried meditating, I didn't get anywhere. Do you meditate? No, I give it that. I never got anywhere. Oh, I see. The minute you think that there is a purpose, because there's no such thing as competitive meditation, you think, okay, sit there and see what result is there. Nothing. You forget that if you look for a result, this is no longer meditation. Going back to the off-quoted thing I quote, Joel Goldsmith's definition. What is meditation? He gives us a beautiful definition. Instead of saying self, he says God, but it's all right. He says, meditation is a song of gratitude that God is here, God is now, God is love. What a beautiful mantra to repeat. God is here, God is now, God is love. Not something to get. So, we cannot attain the self through knowledge. None of these things. Let us explore these words carefully. So, what are the conditions for this revelation? First of all, you have to desist from bad conduct. What does bad conduct constitute? Any conduct that disturbs the harmony of things. Any conduct that emphasizes, yes, so those who are in Dublin will know that's my doorbell. If somebody is in contact with the ashram, please tell them, doorbell is ringing. Thank you. All right. So one who has not desisted from bad conduct, that is egocentric intentions and activities. Anything that tells you, I am embodied, I am this body. Any conduct like that will be selfish. This is called bad conduct. Conduct against dharma or dharma. So dharma comes from a root, as you know, the thing that keeps everything in harmony. The thing that holds things, binds things together in harmony. So this can be applied in every single context, including a behavioral context. The senses are not under control. You have to control these senses, first thing. Before meditation, go and control your senses. Whose mind is not concentrated. With a body that is subject to all kinds of maladies and difficulties, and a jumping mind, is there any hope for us? We have to learn the art of concentration. Concentration means taking all our energy and steering it in one direction. And if you want a definition of concentration, it is to get to a point where time ceases for you, becomes timeless, one-pointed, ekagra, one-pointedness, whose mind is not free from anxiety about the results of this concentration. If you have any of these things, of course, the lack of concentration, no control over the senses, the mind, and so on, then you cannot attain the self through knowledge. So, all right, 1 minute to 12, we'll leave it there. So we leave off on the 24th stanza. First chapter, second section, 24th stanza. Until next week. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.